if are familiar with my work or you've gone to my website, I kind of jump around from topic to topic. But it always stems from a place of research or personal experience. And I think that is indicative of my photojournalism training. So I have a Bachelor of Journalism from the University of Texas. And for a long time, I worked in newspapers and magazines as both a photographer and a photo editor. So as an artist, I'm still operating initially within those sort of traditional confines of photojournalism, but as an artist, I can choose to peel back additional layers and ask certain questions, and also begin to reframe or stage or take an experience and look at it from another perspective. And so the projects that I'm working on are primarily things that I'm interested in, topics that I don't see enough information out there. Again, that's coming from probably my photojournalism background. What areas don't have enough exposure, or it's a taboo subject, but why is it a taboo subject? Should it be a taboo subject? And so a lot of my projects do deal with the body, bodily processes, birth, death, and sex. One of the first pieces I made during the pandemic in early March was an indirect response to a young woman in Georgia, one of the first frontline workers who passed away from COVID. She unfortunately was found dead in her home with her 4-year-old daughter by her side. And as a single mother of 2 kids, I was so deeply moved by this story that I couldn't breathe. And it was at that moment that I realized, what happens to my kids if I get sick? And so I taped up emergency information and our phone number, our address, and how. And so this weight of uncertainty and this weight of care for my children was suffering, because it was all on me to keep them safe and to keep myself safe. And so I initially asked them if they would lay on me or lie on me so that I could experience or visualize this, how I was feeling inside. And of course they said no. But I remembered I had these bricks in my side yard that I had removed to make room for a more kid-friendly play space. And so I had a friend pile the bricks on me, and we continued to pile them until I couldn't bear the weight anymore. And that weight ended up being 60 pounds, which is equivalent to my son or my daughter's weights. They're almost identical in size. And I placed the bricks on my chest in a way to visualize the anxiety I was having, to consider my responsibilities in that moment, and to think about all the other parents or just individuals and how much they were burdening or having to burden during this time. And so we placed the bricks on my chest and I tried to breathe. And luckily I was able to breathe, but it was very strained. And I've done the performance a couple of times now. And the recent performance, which is the one that's showing at the Blaffer, I did it for 30 minutes, which was the longest I had completed or done to this point. And when the bricks were removed, I started to cry, not from relief, but because it felt like the bricks were still on me. And realizing that even when COVID disappears, if it disappears, that the imprint, the effect, the memory of it will linger on all of us. The series Will You Hold Me Forever is a performance that I documented through photography while in isolation with my children. I decided to wear a PPE mask that my father had kindly sent to me. And this is in the initial weeks of the lockdown in Texas. Unfortunately, my extended family in New York passed away from COVID. And I had a really good friend and her son contract the illness, but luckily survived. And I was thinking about my isolation and how unfortunate it was, but also how fortunate I was to be in isolation and to be safe. And I was thinking about all the physicians who were exhausted and working beyond human capability to keep us all safe, and how many people were unable to see their loved ones because of the illness, and who were speaking to them on the phone and having to say goodbye. And I was trying to connect to both my personal experience of the pandemic and this more universal global experience that was happening outside of my walls. And so I decided to wear the mask for 8 hours, the average workday, the average school day. I wanted to isolate myself within my own house from my children and from the outside world in a way that I could manage. And so I decided to wear the mask while I homeschooled my kids, while I did laundry, went for a walk, and cooked, and even sent condolences to family over the phone. I only took the mask off to photograph myself and show the imprint of the mask on my skin. And the first few hours were relatively manageable. And again, this was back when we didn't have the cotton mask. So this was a more severe surgical mask, medical grade mask that I was wearing. So it was very tight on my face with a metal band. And around hour 6, not only was the pressure building in my face and my temples, and I really could not take the pain. And I was thinking about all the people, especially in New York, who I was, watching from a distance, how they could not remove that mask for their own safety, for their own safety of their loved ones, for their safety of themselves, depending on, what their career was or position was. And I began to cry, not only crying from the pain, but the crying from the disconnection to my own children. Every time I kissed my children on the head, I had a mask on. And so I felt that disconnect immediately, and how just tragic that was, and how it was becoming our norm. And that was the way to stay safe. And by hour 7, there was a shift in my experience. I had overcome 7 hours of wearing the mask, intentionally wearing this mask. And in all the portraits that you'll see at the Blaffer, it's the one that I turned sideways. It's more of a profile shot. And I felt a shift happening in me, that I'd, overcome this much. And I also knew that for myself, I only had an hour left, and how freeing that felt. But for so many people, especially physicians and nurses, 8 hours is, maybe half their shift. So I felt very fortunate that I had, given myself this time, and at 8 hours I quits. And I was very relieved to do so. I think that anyone seeing this work, everyone seeing this work, there's no way not to relate to it. We all know what the mask means. I hope one day we don't know what it means, but at least for the next, I don't know, few decades, we're all going to know how seeing that mask, what time that marked. And I think, especially the way that the work is installed, that because it's a sequence, and because it's a timeline and a trajectory that can relate to our own experiences of the initial lockdown, how we began to manage, how we overcame certain aspects, whether or not we got sick or not, how quickly we healed, and how we're moving on, and how are we moving on.